And also, I really miss him.
You know, he was always laughing and always, having a good time, so.
We'd always go to Denny's. That was his favorite restaurant ever.
I know Grandpa always emphasized love and care.
You know, I love my dad. I miss him,
I cannot think of a moment when my dad ever doubted his capability.
Whatever he did it with confidence. So my dad was born on the 22nd of July, 1954 to Colonel Okon Akpan, a medical services officer, and Lady Jenny Akpan, who was a hairstylist and a business owner. He was a role model. He was generous. He was a protector, a provider, a counselor, a leader. And then he had this swagger about him that whatever he did it with confidence. He did it knowing who he was and didn't doubt his decisions. He was a very independent thinker. He didn't just follow trends just because everybody else was doing it. He had his own mind and he moved in that lane. And he had a charisma and a magnetic energy that it didn't matter who you were. If you came into a room where he was, you would be aware that there's someone different in this place. There's someone special.
But we first met on the 20th of October, 1973. My earliest recollections of Afa go back to that very first meeting. First time I ever set eyes on him was actually from the back of a taxi. He was in the front seat and all of us tumbled out of the car. And lo and behold, I got my first good look at Afa. The outfit he was wearing. Wow. My soon-to-be 16-year-old girly eyes liked what I saw.
The day he hits heaven, heaven has become a changed place. Because they must have sent to God that, look, somebody is here and I think you have to meet him. And I'm sure about that. So that is Afa for you, and we thank God for him.
Some special moments make me smile every time I think of it. Moments of my interactions with him as I was growing up. The first one took place when I was 8 years old. I was attending Grace Children's School, and this was our inter-house sports day. And the person that was coordinating the event, called for all fathers who wanted to participate in a father's race to come and be a part of this final event, the finale of the whole inter-house sports day. And to my surprise, my dad got up and decided to, be a part of this race. And so I was very excited because I had just finished competing. Like, wow, my dad is there. All these other big babas were there. My dad, I was born when my dad was 22, so my dad was very young, much younger than a lot of the other baba daddies that were there. And everyone's online, and then they now say, on your marks, get set, and they blow the whistle. And the way my dad took off with full force, he just gapped every other father that was there. Finished the race with probably some of the other fathers were still at the 50 meter mark when he had finished the race, and so he won. And I remember just feeling just this beam of pride as I was looking and telling all my friends, that's my dad.
It's not how long one stays in this world. but how well and how impactful one's life has been. And Uncle Afa he's really set the mark. So for us all to learn from him, his legacy is just unparalleled.
I was in SS3. I was been about 15, 16 years old, and my dad took me to work with him, and he explained how a VOR works, how he gives you a heading and the needles have to be centered, and then you know you're on course to your destination. And when you're going back from where you departed, it's going to give you the reverse. So maybe our heading was something like 330 going to Abuja. And then when we were coming back, I tapped him, I said, "Daddy, so since we're going back to Lagos now, that's why the heading is 150. And he said, "Yeah." And he looked over at his co-pilot and he said, "You see this, my boy? Soon you'll be sitting down there." And as a result of my understanding of how radials and reciprocal headings work, my dad bought me a new phone. I said, I think I need to be aligned in this aviation of a thing.
Afaha Akpan lived well, and he's left a lot of great memories for a lot of people. And I feel very fortunate to have been one of those people that met him when we were so young, and we remained friends till the end of his days.
There's a time we was in Akwa Ibom State. We all went out to have a drink. This was like in the 90s. It was about 10 in the night, and we was on our way back to the hotel where me and my dad was staying at. It was all in Uyo, and me and my dad got on, an Okada, like a public bike, So I was riding down the road like 10 at night, and there was a Mercedes pull up, and someone was wrong, but eventually it would have led to an accident. We was going like 10 miles an hour, and my dad must have seen the accident coming, and he just grabbed me and put his feet down and let the bike just go, by itself, and the bike ran into the Mercedes. It caused a big situation. That's a specific memory I always remember about my dad, showing me that care, because if he was sitting behind me and I was in the middle. So if he hadn't have done that, well, I might have ran into, and broke my bones or whatever. So
he's a man that when anything goes wrong in the family, he will not even look for you. He will sweep in and do whatever the capability can do.
He loves tradition, loves the African tradition. The true black man, likes his people.
So we were in traffic at first, and there was like a little ice cream cart that I think was coming by, and me and my brothers, we wanted ice cream, but then he was like, no, we're not gonna get ice cream from here. So when we got to the mall, we actually went inside of the store, and they got us these giant ice cream cones from whatever little ice cream spot was inside of the store. But I just remember we were sad at first because we wanted the ice cream from the Go Slow, but he wouldn't let us get the ice cream. But it was okay because we got giant ice cream cones from inside the mall.
He took everything, everybody like himself. Very generous. Everything. When he came here, we were so glad that before I leave this house, this room, he did something for us.
One trait I definitely have always admired is just how authentically himself he always was. It didn't matter where he was or who he was talking to. He was just so authentically himself.
I don't remember what kind of ice cream it was. It may have been like strawberry, mint chocolate chip, but it was it was in a little bowl with a cone in it, and sprinkles and a cherry on top, and it was great. It was like one of the best ice creams I ever had.
I used to hide the remote.
And why did you hide the remote?
Because I wanted to watch my program, and I didn't really want him to watch his program.
So where did you hide it?
under the pillows. We used to watch birds and draw pictures and watch the news. I also remember that we used to play games and play cards and play football.
His passing has left a huge void that I can't see being filled at all.
Afa was a fun-loving guy. Yeah, we did a lot of things together. We had a lot of fun. That was one side of him. The other side of him was a serious person who knew what he was doing at all times and who didn't fail to tell people what he felt about anything.
So our family originates from a village in southeastern Nigeria called Ikot Akpabio. Ikot Akpabio is located in Akwa Ibom State, and it's rich in a lot of natural resources like oil, agriculture, natural streams, a lot of delicious food. The people are very warm, very friendly. And we come from the royal family of Akpan Ibanga. Now, Akpan was the first son born to the second daughter of Ibanga. Ibanga was my great grandfather. So my father tells the story of Akpan Noa, who was my great grandfather, being born in 1860 and settling in Ikot Akpabio sometime around 1880 with his followers. He ruled as king over the land, and he grew wealthy due to farming and trade with a lot of the Europeans that were coming into the area. And in September 1884, Akpan Noa had his first son. He fathered his first son, who was my great-grandfather, Effiong Akpan Noa. Effiong Akpan Noa became educated because now his own father had grown in wealth, and so he was able to get educated. He eventually became a teacher and a preacher in the Methodist Church. And my great-grandfather eventually reigned as king of Ikot Akpabio from 1965 to 1990. In July of 1927, my great-grandfather now fathered my grandfather. His name was Okon Akpan, and he also grew up to be very educated. He was one of the first pharmacists in Nigeria. He eventually became a very powerful and influential military officer that was overseeing the entire Nigerian Armed Forces Medical Corps. And then eventually, by July of 1954, my father was now born as the second son of Colonel Okon Akpan and Lady Jenny Hansen Akpan. So my dad had a very active childhood. He was a very energetic little boy. He loved to be creative. He would build kites and, run around the compound trying to get his kites to fly. As a matter of fact, he says that that's where he began his love of aviation. As he started getting older into his teenage years, and it was time for him to start secondary school, my grandfather decided that it would be best for him and his older brother and sisters to go back towards Akwa Ibom State, our home state, to attend secondary school and to help to immerse him better in the culture and to understand the people, understand our traditions and our ways and things like that. So in December of 1966, around Christmas time, my father left with my grandmother to head towards our village in Ikot Akpabio to celebrate the Christmas holiday out there in Ikot Akpabio, but then also in preparation for him to begin secondary school, which the secondary school that he was going to be attending was called Kwaibo Mission Secondary School in Etinan. So he started secondary school in January of 1967. And by July of 1967, unbeknownst to him, a civil war had broken out in Nigeria, the Biafran War. And in the school that he was attending, Kwaibo Mission Secondary School, Colonel Ojukwu and his Biafran soldiers actually came onto the school grounds to come and inform all of them that school had been immediately suspended, that all the students who were in Form 1 to Form 3 were released, and if you're in Form 4 and above, you were now automatically recruited into the Biafran army. So my father was in Form 1 and was released indefinitely until the war was going to be over. So he went back to stay with my great-grandfather, who was now reigning as king of Ikot Akpabio. With the announcement of the war, my grandfather was concerned about my grandmother still being in the area and very quickly instructed her to return back to Lagos to the family house, while my father, his older brother and sister were left in Akwa Ibom in the boarding school, or in the area, the boarding house. During this time, he had to grow up mentally and physically. You know, he had to endure a lot of hardships, and there was a lot of rations, there was not a lot of food, there was not a lot of supplies that was coming into the area. So as young men, they had to very quickly realize that they needed to be taking care of themselves as they grew up. As time progressed, my grandfather, who was not at the time serving in the Nigerian army, had enlisted in the Nigerian army, in the medical corps, and had started to gain some rank. And he was now in charge of the Medical Services Corps and set aside a mission to go and retrieve the Nigerian soldiers who were around the war front, the Biafran war front, to retrieve all the wounded soldiers and bring them back towards Lagos to get proper medical attention. During this mission to go and retrieve the Nigerian soldiers, my grandfather was able to make a quick detour into the village of Ikot Akpabio to rescue my father and my brother and his sister. Upon returning from the Biafran War back to Lagos after the rescue, after my grandfather rescued my father from the village, my father had to continue going to secondary school, and he was enrolled in a school that was right around the corner from where they lived in Yaba, called Igbobi College. My dad grew to love Igbobi College. It was one of the things that defined him. An incident happened where a student that had graduated from Igbobi College returned to visit the school and to just see some old friends and things like that. And this student had gone off and become a pilot. He came back to the school in a brand new Citroen, really cool, flashy looking car. And this really excited my dad about the prospect of getting into aviation. It reinvigorated his original passion from back in the day when he was flying kites and just fascinated about flight. This singular moment made him change his career plans. Originally, he was thinking of going into geology, but he changed his career plan from geology to aviation because he saw that the aviation just seemed to have this glamorous lifestyle, and it appealed to him. During the time that he was at Igbobi College, he also got involved in sports. My dad loved sports a lot. He actually was selected to be on the school's football team, representing the school, and he played in the number 7 position. So I attended Igbobi College in 1988. There was a fundraiser event that was going on, and I can't remember what it was, raising funds to support, but I came home and told my dad about it. There was a registration form, a contribution form that our teachers had sent us home with. Each student was required to bring 50 naira, and whichever class raised the most money, I think the teacher was going to receive a prize or an award or recognition, or it was going to be recognized in some way. So I came home with this contribution form to present to my father. And I said, Daddy, we're raising money for the school to do something. And he said, how much are they raising? I said, I don't know what they're raising money for, but each student is required to bring 50 naira. So my dad said, go and bring me my checkbook. So I brought his checkbook to him, and he wrote me a check for 5,000 naira. I was like, wow. So I went to the school the next day to give my teacher my contribution from my father. When my teacher saw this 5,000 naira, now mind you, this is in 1988, where the price of things was much different. And he saw this 5,000 naira check. He literally ran out of the classroom, holding the check in his hand, up and down the hallway celebrating, because I think he knew that he was about to win whatever recognition the teachers were going to receive. Upon coming back after his celebration, he now called me to the front and immediately appointed me as prefect of the class. And here I have my Igbobi College ID card showing my prefect status. And I still hold with me, and I cherish it. And it reminds me again of my father, because he did it out of the love of Igbobi College, not seeking any kind of recognition, not seeking any kind of award. It was just something. He wrote me a check just on a whim, just because he wanted to see Igbobi College excel. Okay, so after graduating from Igbobi College, my father spent a lot of his time essentially becoming a Lagos boy. He enjoyed music, enjoyed going to concerts, visited the Fela shows, concerts at the Shrine quite frequently. It was some of his favorite types of music and types of way to spend time and to entertain himself with his friends. And during that time, during his time at Igbobi College, he had made friends with my uncle, Uncle Bola. And it turns out that Uncle Bola was dating someone at the time who was friends with my mother. And so they suggested, oh, well, why don't we go out on a double date? I'll introduce you to my cousin, Tyra, and she's also friends with his girlfriend at the time. And so they set aside some time to go out to dinner, and they had planned a specific time to pick them up. And as it turns out, they were late for that appointment. And my mother had a curfew of 9 p.m. And if I understand correctly, they arrived shortly before 9 o'clock. And my mother was very concerned that she would not be able to make it back in time for her curfew. And my dad, being the confident talker that he was, basically said, oh, don't worry, we'll get you back on time. Needless to say, they did not get them back on time, and they dropped my mother back off at around 11 o'clock. From that moment on, they were pretty much inseparable. They really grew an affection for one another. Shortly after they met, my dad had made arrangements to head to the United States, to Portland, Oregon, to begin his flight training, which he did. And when he left, a few weeks after arriving in the United States, he found himself really missing my mother, or missing his girlfriend. And so he wrote a letter to my grandfather, my mother's father, asking for his blessing and his permission to marry my mother, and if he would be willing to let my mother come and join him in the United States. He accepted the request from my father. Thereafter, they got married and started raising a family. Throughout the time, their bond grew stronger and stronger. They prayed together often and held Bible devotions often, and even having my dad lead the devotion sometimes. So after graduating from Igbobi College, as I mentioned earlier, my father had aspirations to go into aviation, but my grandfather had no interest in him getting into aviation. He actually was concerned that aviation was too dangerous. He didn't trust that my dad was responsible enough to have the lives of other passengers being put into his hands. He wanted my dad to be a lawyer. My dad had no interest in law and appealed back and said, I prefer to get into aviation. As luck would have it, one of my father's uncles, Dr. Eshet, that lived in Portland, Oregon, came home to Nigeria for a visit. And the topic of my dad wanting to go to flight school came up. And Dr. Eshet took this opportunity to reassure my grandfather that if he permitted my father to come to the United States, that he could come to Portland, Oregon to train, and that he would keep a watchful eye over my dad during his training. And also reassured him that it was safe, that there wasn't anything to be concerned about as far as like the area, violence and things like that. So this comforted the concerns of my grandfather, and he accepted the request. So on the 2nd of January 1974, my father actually departed for Portland, Oregon, and he started his flight training at the Hillsborough School of Aviation. He was very, very focused. He arrived in the United States with a drive and a determination to accomplish his goal. And he used every opportunity that he had to accelerate that growth. He actually completed his private license by July of 1975, then proceeded on to continue to his commercial pilot's license. That he completed by the 22nd of July 1976, which actually was his birthday, and it became a very big celebration. He went out with friends who announced publicly that, hey, this young brother had just achieved his commercial pilot's license. Then proceeded on. Within 6 weeks of receiving that commercial pilot's license, he moved on to get his multi-engine rating, which he accomplished that around the 30th of August, which was literally the day before I was born, when he got his multi-engine rating. Then the final phase of his training was the completion of the instrument license, which he completed by the 18th of October, 1976. And shortly thereafter, November 25th, he made his return to Nigeria. He decided to return unannounced. He didn't tell his parents, he didn't tell anyone that he was coming back, except for my mother knew. My mother and myself, I had been born in September. By November, they had left. By October, they left to go back to Nigeria. By November, my dad was coming back to join them. So no one knew he was coming back. And in typical dramatic fashion of my dad, he arrived back in Nigeria with just wearing a singlet, a tank top, 2 guitars slung over his shoulder, an earring in his left ear. The tank top said USA on it, and he just appeared at home, to the dismay of my grandmother and the rest of the family, because it was a big deal to have someone traveling internationally coming back. They wanted to prepare the house, prepare food, prepare a welcome to welcome you home, and they didn't have the opportunity to do that. But he walks into the house. My grandfather was taking an afternoon nap, and my dad walks into his room with these guitars and earrings and everything to wake up his father, to present his certificates and to say, hey, I have returned home after accomplishing the mission that I set out to accomplish. My grandfather was not impressed. My grandfather actually did not believe that the certificates that he had received were actually genuine certificates. And it wasn't until that evening that my grandfather went out to go and meet and associate with some of his colleagues to realize, and he shared these certificates with some colleagues that he had in the aviation industry, who vouched and said, hey, this is actually a legitimate, these are legitimate certificates, and yes, he's actually a licensed pilot now, of which my grandfather was very, very proud. Then he now began the journey of looking for work, for employment. He actually took a job with Nigeria Airways at the time as an operations officer. So he wasn't flying, but just in the administrative side of the industry. My dad wasn't very interested in that. He wanted to fly. That was his whole passion, that was his whole goal. And he didn't stay very long in that position. So he actually applied to work with the Civil Aviation Flying Unit. And he flew with them for a short while, but the aircraft at the Civil Aviation were frequently grounded. And because they were grounded, he wasn't getting very many flight hours and he needed to progress in the career. So he resigned from that position and then he applied for work at the Intercontinental Airlines, which was a cargo airline at the time. That too didn't last very long. He worked there for about 2 years and he left that position and he returned back to Nigeria Airways back in 1979 to actually fly as a first officer on the F-27 aircraft. By the time he was getting ready for retirement, he had become licensed in many different aircrafts, from Boeing aircrafts to Airbus aircrafts and many series within those different brands, to become one of the most accomplished aviators in Nigeria. My dad was a very social person, so there was never really a dull moment when he was around. I remember Christmas parties especially. I would say that those parties were quite legendary. We had a house packed full of uncles, aunties, cousins, friends, neighbors, local people from the area. Food was flowing everywhere, drinks were flowing everywhere, music was flowing everywhere. The atmosphere was full of energy, it was electric. We had a routine where we would frequently go to the beach on Sundays. And this was where I got to learn how to ride horses and just have quality time. We would literally just sit on the shoreline, just watching the water. I remember specifically my 10th birthday party. My dad had gone on a simulator to Brazil. And when he came back, he packed in a cargo area a bicycle for me when I was turning 10. And this bike was like nothing else anyone had ever seen in Lagos at that time. It was a bicycle that looked like a motorcycle, full of headlights, suspension, gears, body kit, everything. And I remember just being so elated, the massive birthday parties that were thrown. But even though he was a very social person, he was also a very serious person when there was time to be serious. He was he was traditional and had a very high ethical and moral standards. I remember something that he would say to us: I live my life today in a way that when I'm no longer here, no one can ever come back and say that Afaha cheated anyone out of anything, Afaha stole anything from anyone, or Afaha used his position to collect bribes or collect things that he was not entitled to. He was also incredibly generous. His generosity was infectious. And those character traits, I believe, has transferred into myself and my brothers, and even those that have been blessed to be close to my father to observe these things. He loved music. So my dad was a man of the people. It didn't matter what your social group was. As a matter of fact, I would venture to say that he was most comfortable in social groups that you would not really expect a man of his influence to be in the circle of. I often admired how he would go and he would just sit and be comfortable with local guys in the area, having drinks with them, fellowshipping with them, getting to know them, getting to know their situation. But he especially loved his people in Ikot and the surrounding villages of Nsit-Atai. This philanthropy, I would say that he learned or he observed from my grandfather, Captain Afaha Okon Akpan, who also was very philanthropic and also gave back to the community and helped to train a lot of people. And through all of this generosity and just things that my father did out of the sincere intent of his heart, caught the attention of the paramount ruler of Nsit-Atai, Edwek Nsit-Atai, who called my father, had meetings and discussions with him, and my father never ever did anything with any intention of political motivations. That was the furthest thing from his mind, the furthest thing from his intent. He just loved to give. He subsequently got awarded the title of chief, and the chieftaincy title was the Edwek of Nsit-Atai, which in summary means the bringer of progress to the community of Nsit-Atai. During this time where he served in this role as the Edwek, he continued to do many things like sponsoring local indigents with training and personal development opportunities. He also did various projects within the area, things like developing the construction of the tarmac resort in Ikot-Akpabio. And he did a lot of these things, especially like the construction of the resort. The intent behind it was to be able to first provide a means of employment for local indigents, but then the broader vision was that the hope of attracting tourism to the area. He brought all of these things and sadly was not able to finish a lot of what he had planned for, but by the grace of God, we who are here that have been left, we will pick up where he left off. As I mentioned earlier, my dad was a very, very independent thinker. During his retirement years, he spent a lot of time supporting indigents, raising money to provide training opportunities, empower the youth. He also started to draw a greater curiosity about God, a greater curiosity about himself, doing some more soul searching. He spent quite a bit of time handwriting his autobiography. Of course, spending time with my mother. They would have frequent Bible devotions together. And as I mentioned before, Dad would lead these devotions on occasion. So it started back in 1992 while he was still working for Nigeria Airways. He began to develop an interest in real estate. So in 1992, while conversing with some of his colleagues in Nigeria Airways, someone happened to mention that there was a property in Ayobo that he should take a look at. And at that time, it was a village. In fact, it's still to this day considered a village in many respects. And at first, he wasn't interested, but then curiosity got to him, and he said, well, let me go and check it out. And he did, and he got very interested in it. He purchased the property and slowly would begin to invest in this property. As he gets a little bit of, with his salary from work, he would set aside a certain portion to be able to complete a small task within the development of the project. And by using this approach, by using this strategy, he was able to complete in 2006 the building of our family home in Ayobo. Then shortly after that, while he was doing all of this, he started expanding his thinking into, okay, what else can I do? And he found out that there were some other properties that were available in the neighborhood that would be good for commercial use. So he increased his portfolio into these commercial land properties, and he purchased a few plots. By doing so, he then proceeded to begin building what we know today as a tarmac, and subsequently the hall. By 2010, the tarmac had been completed, again using the same approach, a little bit here a little, there a little, here a little, there a little, applying whatever money he could as much as he could. He would set aside and complete various phases of the project until it was completed without incurring any debt. And then by 2016, he began to develop the Tarmac Resort in our home village in Ikorakpabio. Sadly, he wasn't able to complete it, which we're picking up the mantle, my brother, spearheaded by my brother Imi. But what's very interesting to note as I sit and I reflect on the activities that he made, that everywhere that he invested in were all up and coming future opportunities. And he would say very frequently that all of the investments that I'm setting aside or investing in right now is not for me, it's for my descendants. So on the 4th of March, 2023, my mother set up a group message to myself and my brothers, expressing a concern about my father. His lack of appetite, his breathing patterns, his energy levels, and just his overall demeanor, his overall health. We ultimately deemed that we need to get him to the hospital to get a checkup. We set an appointment for a physical exam on the 6th of March. It was a couple of days later, 2 days later. After that physical exam, Dad came home, was fellowshipping with the family, my brothers, my mother, the family. And after a little while, he decided that he wanted to go and take a nap, get some rest. So he went to sleep. And shortly after he went to take this nap, he experienced a mini stroke. So we immediately rushed him back to the hospital. The doctors observed him and ultimately, at the end of the day, deemed that he was stable enough to return home that night. That was sort of where the challenges began. Over the next 8 weeks, he would go through a series of medical ups and downs, and doctors would struggle to stabilize him. Ultimately, on the 2nd of May, 2023, God decided it was time for him to finish his race and called him home. The news of his passing sent a shockwave through the community in the local area, back at home in Ikorakpabio in Akwa Ibom State, with family and friends around the world, because his passing was literally within 8 weeks of the first message that my mother sent. It was relatively short, relatively unexpected. For people who hadn't spoken to him in, say, 3 months, it was a shock because they had just spoken to him so recently. But I remember something that he said during the 8 weeks that he was undergoing treatment, almost as if it was a premonition that he knew that his time was coming to an end. And I'm going to paraphrase because this statement, it stood out to me. And he essentially said, "Others cannot raise up unless I leave." I'm not saying these words verbatim, but essentially, that's a paraphrase of the statement that he made. And I remember when he made that statement, I didn't say much, but in the back of my mind, I wondered, why did he make that statement? My dad was a confident man all the way to the end. Even in the moment where he was facing the greatest of challenges, he was still confident. He was still strong. His resolve was still strong. Even in the face of possibly transitioning into eternity, he was cognizant enough to make a statement like that. I'm really thankful for his life. And so I'll end by saying that by the grace of God, those of us that are here that remain, his descendants, we will continue to be a source of support to the community as he was, as he started and as he founded the foundation himself, the Afaha Akpan Foundation. By the grace of God, we will continue as we have picked up that mantle, and we will honor his legacy. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be called his son. I'm thankful for the example that he set. I'm thankful for the man that he was, and will continue to carry the flag high.
I wish we could keep on playing for a little while. And also I wish he could be with me. And also I really miss him.
Thank you for just the example that you were able to set. Thank you for, like we were saying before, how you were able to contribute to me and my brothers, our elementary education, for you know, just your example and your role in our family and for everything that you've done for us.
I would thank him for two things specifically. One, for putting me through private school education, giving me a solid, firm educational foundation from kindergarten, which has ultimately led to my excelling in the IB program that I'm in. And also, I would thank him for raising my father, who is a kind, loving, sheltering, protecting Nigerian father.
I would thank him even more for everything that he has done for us. And I would make sure that he knows even more how loved he is. I would let him know how much more he is appreciated.
You know, I love my dad. I miss him, you know. I'm gonna see him in paradise though, you know.
Just ask him to tell me stories about his childhood, being a pilot, like all of his experiences. Yeah, I really just wish I could have got to know him better. Yeah, that's really the biggest thing.
Miss him?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's it. Thank you.